This lock right here represents a perfect FPV drone build, and well, this is the key to unlock it. Unfortunately, right now, our key has got 3 major issues, all of which need to be fixed for it to actually fit inside the lock. So, in today's video, I'll be showing you what these 3 mistakes are, how they're costing you time, money, and sanity, and of course, how to fix your key so you can unlock that perfect FPV drone build. The first issue with our key is that it looks like this. It's got so many imperfections and burrs that all stack on top of each other, ending with you not actually being able to fit the key inside, let alone turn to unlock. So what is causing this, and how the heck do you fix it? In the drone building world, these imperfections primarily come from 3 things. The first is all to do with how much or how little you actually cut your wires. While building a drone, it's pretty easy to just roughly cut the wire you need and then start soldering it down to connect all of your components together. If you're anything like me, you probably have a bit of a she'll be right attitude where you skip the measuring stage and just kind of snip the wires at a point where it looks about right. This is the first third of removing those burrs off of our key. You need to actually make sure your wires are being cut as short as possible, obviously with a bit of wiggle room, but not so much that you need to be coiling up and tucking away the excess wire around the place. The second part of our imperfections is something that I have neglected so many times and never actually picked up on until it was pointed out to me. You see these wires here? If you can spot the problem, then you'll hopefully not be making this imperfection. However, if you can't, then allow me to show you. This is the same ESC board with those same wires, but now it's been fixed up. The difference here is between the length of the stripped back ends, these parts. By leaving those ends stripped back too far, you're setting yourself up for a higher chance of short circuits and issues down the line. So by only stripping these ends back the same amount as the pads that you're soldering to, you're minimizing your short circuit chances significantly. Then the third part of our problem, stopping us from sliding this damn key into the lock, can be fixed by paying attention to the finishing touches. The finishing touches are still to do with the wires here, as now that you've made sure you have a cleaner cut of wire and the end is insulated all the way up to the pad, it's still important to twist them all up. Without twisting our wires together where possible, we're allowing additional vibrations to come from them and then mess around with our flight controller. That can often be the difference between a quad that flies beautifully smooth and one that jumps around super rough. This is not the time to just pump up the filtering either. You're only going to be prolonging your issue to your future builds. Alright, so with the removal of all those burrs and imperfections, the key should now fit into the barrel of the lock. But when I go to try, it still doesn't quite. Right now, it's being stopped by a buildup of rust inside the lock barrel, which means it's way too stiff to slide in properly. For us with our drone build, it isn't quite rust, but it is a buildup of dust and metal oxide that is stopping us. Like, have you ever felt as though your soldering just doesn't flow nicely and you always end up with non-glossy connections that look like this? Well, I have a literal magic solution that genuinely will fix all your soldering problems. And I can say this so confidently because it damn well did for me. All you have to do is add a little bit of the solution to every solder joint that you're working on, especially older joints that have got a bit of buildup on them, but it can also help out a ton on new ones too. Once you've got the solution on them, you can continue to solder like normal, making sure you use enough, but hey, also not too much that it flows over and starts linking multiple pads together. And then you'll be right on track to doing the best solders you've ever seen in your life. At this point, you're probably wondering what the heck the solution is, right? And as many times as I've actually been told that you don't need any more of it, it's called flux, and you absolutely should use more. What it does is it cleans up the outside surface of your solder, helps conduct heat between your soldering iron and your connection, and it also makes the solder itself flow so much easier. Combine those 3 things and you'll find soldering suddenly becomes one of the easiest parts of the build, and that you'll finally be able to slide your key all the way inside the barrel. So now that we're at the stage of unlocking the perfect drone build, what happens if we try to turn the key before fixing the third issue? Well, this happens and our key snaps clean off. Now, this could have been totally avoided if we'd just fixed the third issue first and made sure the foundation of our key was made from a solid material. The same can be said for the foundations of our drone build too. Everything might look fine as you're finishing up your build and you're finally happy with how those solder joints came out, but as soon as you take it out to fly, it's terrible. So linking back to the first problem, we know that if the drone is flying terribly, it's most likely down to those frustrating vibrations that are going through your flight controller. But that begs the question, where the heck are those vibrations coming from if we've already made sure our wires are all tidy? Well, I've made this mistake countless times as well, and as soon as I fixed it, didn't even feel like I was flying the same drone. All it took was a screwdriver, a bit of Loctite, and some time. What I'm talking about here is the frame, the stack, the motors, and every other little component you may have mounted inside. If you haven't properly tightened all of your screws, especially the ones in your frame, you'll find that no matter what, your drone won't be able to fly without tons of filtering. As soon as you tighten them all up and add a bit of Loctite to them, you're making sure those foundations are solid once again. With that being said though, there are still a few more foundations to focus on as well, otherwise your key's still going to look like this. You've got your stack mounting, which needs to be secured with rubber grommets and nuts, but also not rigid in place. The VTX and RX both need to be securely attached to the frame as well, otherwise you're allowing components to bounce around as you fly. And finally, any wires from the motors are all secured down with something like zip ties, tape, or even heat shrink. So it's pretty self-explanatory on what you need to be doing here. Instead of making the foundation of your key fragile, make sure that you're using a solid base that is actually built to last. With your newly refined key, you'll now be able to unlock your perfect drone build and have a blimmin' good flying drone. But although we've just covered the 3 worst mistakes, it's still not everything. There are seriously thousands of things I wish I had known before starting out on the hobby, so to make sure you have the smoothest possible experience, I've made this video here for you to go and watch that shows you my top 50 FPV drone secrets so you don't have to learn the hard way like I did.